Welcome to the Better German podcast. My name is Susie Blümel, and I will teach you German and everything around the language, the countries, and the culture. So I'm really thrilled you're tuning in, whether you're coming back or you're listening to my podcast for the very first time. In this episode, I'm going to cover the basic rules of capitalization in German. Capitalization means which words do we write with a big letter in the beginning. This is something that I wanted to cover quite in the beginning of the podcast because while I'm going along this podcast, I kind of follow a path like a course. So I highly suggest you to start in the beginning of the podcast and follow along through the episodes. So I don't have any additional materials for this episode, but I want to refer you to something that I published with the last episode, and that is an interactive guide about German movies and shows. So in the last episode, which was episode 14, I describe it, and you can access it on my homepage. This is bettergerman.info/movies, and I'll also link to it in the show notes. And I highly suggest you to get it because watching movies with subtitles is one of the best things you can do to help you learn German, and I think it's probably the most entertaining one. You can find the show notes at bettergerman.info/the number of the episode. This is episode 15. So the show notes are bettergerman.info/15. Or you should also be able to see them wherever you are listening to this podcast. Okay, so let's jump into this episode. We're going to cover which words in German are written with big letters. This is different in German than in most of the other languages, or all of the other languages actually. And it's something that you will see, and maybe you're wondering about it, and therefore we're covering which one's which. So welcome to the Better German podcast. I'm Susie. I'm a German teacher. And I have decided that I want to help people to learn German without the super complications that are sometimes there. It is a language that can be learned, and I'm going to help you with it. So if you follow this podcast from the first episode, actually, it's more or less built up like a course. So let's get into our subject. It's actually very easy. Like, which words do we write with a big letter? So, as also English, we write every beginning of a sentence with a big letter. Okay, that's the easy part. We write names with big letters, obviously. Susie, or also last names. Franz Meyer, Franz being the first name, Meyer the last name. But we also write every noun with a big letter. So every noun, a noun is a word like chair, wall, window, and things like that. So in German, these would be written with a big letter. So the German translations, not the English ones, obviously. So in German, window, Fenster, we write Fenster with a capital. A capital is a big letter. So, not a small letter. In German, by the way, this is called Großschreibung. So, groß meaning big, and Schreibung is the way how you write something. So, Großschreibung is what are you writing with a big letter in the beginning. So, the Großschreibung in German is every noun is written with a big letter, das Fenster, das Bild, das Kind. And one of the easy rules is if you have an article in front of it, you will write it with a big letter. Why am I telling you this? Basically, the main reason why I'm telling this to you as a beginner is so you don't get puzzled by it. And when you learn a new noun, yes, you will try to write it correctly with a big letter. I don't think it's something that you should get worried about very much, but try to do it correctly, obviously. By the way, German is the only language on this planet that does that. It's literally the only language that will write all nouns with capitals. Usually, like English, It's the beginning of sentences and a few other occasions. But German really writes every noun with a big letter. And actually, throughout the history of German, for many, many years, there have also been people that said, okay, maybe we should get rid of it. I'm not going to go into if it's good or bad that it's done like that. There are certain reasons why this is the case, which I'm not going to go into right now because that's like deep into the grammar. But anyway, German is the only language that does that. And this rule, so far as I have told you, is relatively easy. So every noun is written with a capital, with a big letter in the beginning. And why am I telling this to you? I'm basically telling this to you at this point so you're not getting confused. So if you see that something is written with a big letter, you can know it's a noun. One thing, however, that is important to know here, that other words can be written with big letters as well, depending on how they are used in the sentence. So, for example, when you say something like, my husband snores when sleeping. Mein Mann schnarcht beim Schlafen. Schlafen, sleeping, is actually not a noun originally, but if you use it in this way, when sleeping, beim Schlafen, then it's also written with a big letter. You don't need to worry if you're a beginner or like only a little bit advanced on learning the rules. When are you writing things with a big letter? I just want you to not get confused why that is the case. So if you see that in a book, you'll understand it. I'm going to tell you a few words, a few examples that give you a clue why things are written that way. So every word is written with a capital in the beginning of a sentence. Then, next point, that's maybe a question. How is it when you have headings, when you have titles of books? In English, the rule is actually different. In English, when you have a title of a book, for example, or the name of a chapter, you write every word except for the really small ones like in and the with a capital. In German, we don't do that. In German, we write all the nouns with a capital. And I'm going to give you a few more examples. When you have, for example, before a word, an article, you will write it with a big letter usually. So if you say das Lesen ist gut, reading is good, and there's a das before, you will see it's a big letter. And there is another word that I'm telling you, beim, for example, beim Lesen, when reading, you will always write this with a capital. But at this point in time, don't worry about it. When you learn new nouns, words like table, chair, love, you know that this is something that is written with a capital. And when you see other things written with a capital, just note it for now. Don't worry about the rule too much and know that this can happen. And when you are more advanced, then we're going to go more into the exact rules when you do that. But honestly, I think for a learner of German as a second language, until you get to the point where you say, okay, you want to write correctly, you want to be able to write whole articles in German and essays or books, you don't have to worry about that ever. But know that this is there and don't get confused about it. So I hope if you had a question mark about this or were wondering, then I hope that it is no longer there. And if you were always like, I don't care about them, then that's fine and carry on with it. Okay. See you next time. The next episodes are going to be the second part of the holidays in autumn and winter in Vienna. This one, I'm excited about it on one hand. On the other hand, I always think I have forgotten something. There is something else I need to add. But anyway, it's coming up. I'm almost finished with the edit. And then I have an episode coming, which is called at this point, Why Pay for a German Course? So I'm going to cover some points for you to consider if you're looking at, are you going to do a German course? Do you want to pay for it or not? And what are actually the plus points, as far as I can tell from my experience, to paying a course as opposed to learning by yourself with YouTube or a podcast or things like that. So, with that episode, I want to give you more information so you can make a more educated decision when you're looking at whether or not you should pay for a German course. This is probably true not just for a German course, but as this podcast is about learning German, I've particularly looked at it from that viewpoint. And then the next one after that is actually we're going to cover the German alphabet and the basics of the German pronunciation. I cannot cover everything about German pronunciation, obviously, in one podcast episode, but we're going to cover the basics. This is an episode that I am going to record with video. So while you will be able to listen to it as a podcast, you will also be able to watch it as a video. Okay, cool. So this is just to give you a little bit of an idea of what's coming. See you the next time. See you in the next episode. See you next week. Hang in there. Do well. And one other thing, if you like this podcast, please tell other people about it. Subscribe to the podcast. And if you want to get notified about a new episode or new things coming up, then please go to bettergerman.info/newsletter and sign up for the newsletter there. See you next week. Bye bye.